Tom Campbell, is a career NASA Department of Defense, Army Technical Intelligence scientist. He is a government scientist working on, he worked on the Ares 1 program. His job was to figure out all the ways the shuttle could go wrong and blow up. So he's again, no slouch. But at the same time, while he was doing this, he was the lead scientist for Bob Monroe. And Bob Monroe famously wrote Journeys Out of the Body because he was having spontaneous out-of-body experiences and didn't know what to do about it. Bob was already rich well before the book came out. He made his money in media, radio. I believe he produced the show The Shadow. And he's trying to figure out, he's not happy about having spontaneous out-of-body experiences. He's a pretty regular guy. He actually coins that word, I believe, because prior to that, everyone was just using the word astral projection. But I'm pretty sure Bob Monroe coined that word, journeys out of the body. So Campbell gets linked up with Bob Monroe because Bob Monroe is looking for scientists to help him, figure out what's going on. So they get Campbell, who's a physicist. His graduate work was in experimental nuclear physics. And a gentleman named Dennis Menerick, who's an electrical engineer. And together they help build Monroe Laboratories, now known famously as the Monroe Institute. Bob manages to teach Campbell how to do out-of-body, and Dennis Menerick as well. And they do all the tests. These are scientists, so they're not pushovers. I want to make that clear. These guys are not pushovers. They're scientists. So they do experiments like writing words on a blackboard, going into out-of-body, and then getting those words right. They both go on out-of-body journeys at the same time in different rooms, in different soundproof rooms. They each have a microphone, and they have actually learned how to talk while in the out-of-body state. There are recordings of this that you can find on YouTube and on the Internet Archive. It's called the Explorer Tapes. Okay. And the thing that blew Campbell's mind was that he went on an out-of-body journey with Dennis Menerick. They get out of the out-of-body state, and then Bob Monroe plays both their tapes at the same time, and they were on the same adventure. Like, the timing is perfect. It's like, do you see that over there? It's like, yeah, I see that over there. And they were in soundproof booths. No way it could have been done, unless you want to suggest that, oh, well, maybe they were just having a telepathic exchange, which would be the only way you could get out of this.
Yeah, but that's
now,
even...
while they're...
Sorry.
Right. Exactly.
That's even incredible. It's a psychic...
Exactly. Oh, telepathy. Oh, okay. Good. Well, I was worried that we were going out of body together. Now, what's amazing is that while they're doing all this out-of-body research, and, Campbell's working for the government at the same time, and Monroe Laboratories evolves into the Monroe Institute. But while this is happening, and they're expanding, and they're teaching other people how to do out-of-body stuff and things like that, other experiences start happening to people. Campbell can suddenly start seeing auras. The Monroe Institute and the people involved in it are suddenly being haunted by UFO sightings. There's orbs showing up on the grounds. Strange dreams. So there's all kinds of these secondary paranormal phenomenon occurring around the folks that are doing Monroe Labs, Monroe Institute. What about the paranormal? So Campbell, one of the things that got me really interested in Campbell is that I was raised by Christian mystics who also had a background in working for government science. So my world has always been science is cool and mystical experiences are cool. So I never had a problem looking into the paranormal on two ones. One as a cultural feature that's just kind of kinky and interesting. And then two, people who actually do hard research and, folks like Russell Targ, Hal Puthoff, A paper was just published by some guys in Germany or Denmark that were using remote viewing protocols to make money on the stock market, and they did it. So I'm always interested in,
Wow.
hard science that can back it up. Yeah, there's lots of cases of people making money, published results, peer-reviewed results, where they're using remote viewing to make money. It has been done. It can be done. It is non-controversial. The only thing controversial is how do you model that into a normal physicalist assumption about reality? That's when it's
Right.
controversial. The results aren't controversial. What's controversial is how do we assimilate that into like space-time is real. So, you know, so in terms of the paranormal elements in the simulation situation is that Campbell ends up putting out that like this is how paranormal stuff works. How do you explain the unexplained? How is it that a UFO would travel 1 billion light years, okay, and visit us just to pop into our atmosphere and pop out again? Like, where does that logic actually work? How does remote viewing work? What are ghosts? He told this is amazing. Many years ago, I asked Campbell, like, I want to explore this a little bit further. Do you have any recommendations? And he said, like, yeah, try like not speaking for a few days, like a weekend, maybe a week, see what happens. Just live your life on a silent retreat. I never did that, but I always wanted to. But what he told me, which blew my mind, he was like, play with a Ouija board.
Mm.
And I was stunned. I was stunned that he was like, no, just play with a Ouija board. Just, write down the numbers and the letters and then play with a Ouija board. See what happens. Since he's told me that, I have used the Ouija board 300 or 400 times with friends and things. I know the cursed Ouija board,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
His explanation is like, why is the impossible possible? The impossible is possible because it's a simulation. Now, what do you really mean when you say it's a simulation? It means exactly that sentence that you mentioned earlier. It appears real. And you don't even need to go into physicists who talk about how atoms are more better described as information to do this. You can go into cognitive science if you want. Donald Hoffman, I guess, is like the leader in that field now, where we already know colors are an illusion. There are no colors. There is no such thing. We see them right now. We see them everywhere, but there are no colors in terms of what is total reality. There are colors in terms of the subjective experience. As a human being, that's not colorblind, period. That's it. Mm-hmm. So going further with Hoffman, he's like, I don't think that animals evolve to like see reality. They evolve to approach fitness, and they do this by a series of hacks. And that hack is the subjective experience. But there is no one-to-one parallel between subjective experience and what's really out there at any moment. So the paranormal in the simulation situation, and the one who's done the most work on that is Campbell. So if you're talking about paranormal and simulation, you're just talking about Campbell, really.
Okay.
Yeah. The other guys are like, maybe it's possible, but Campbell's got like a long, strong explanation of like, what is the paranormal? Why does it happen? What is magic? He doesn't call it magic, but he has no background in like, ceremonial magic or Aphia's levy or anything like that. He did experiments that made magic real to him, but he never calls it. You will never see him use the word magic with a K. So all of that stuff is real because the show on its surface is phony baloney. He even has this line where he talks about the ghost. I saw a ghost. I saw a ghost of my dead Uncle Fred. And whenever Tom tells a story, he always uses like, or makes an analogy. He always uses like, oh, it's dead Uncle Fred. It was dead Uncle Fred on the other end of the Ouija board. I know because dead Uncle Fred told me things that only dead Uncle Fred could know. And he's like, you know what else could know? A big computer. A big computer would know just what dead Uncle Fred would think, would feel, would say. That's powerful because think about it. Is this world really populated with ghosts? Is the afterlife so boring that they come back to here? Like, if you run this through logically, what is on the other side of the Ouija board? After enough iterations, I was like, this is a chat bot. This is a chat bot. It's a chatbot that runs on your intention. And if you want something spooky, it will give you something spooky. Because the entire point of the paranormal, and let's say paranormal in terms of entities, the entire entities, precognitive dreams, visions, things like that, not necessarily paranormal in terms of you using your intent to affect change, but paranormal in terms of the beastery out there. Those elements exist and show up just as world openers. Cameron, I forgot his name now. I think it's David Cameron, the UFO researcher from Canada, who wrote a book about, he wrote UFOs in the White House, and he wrote a book about famous rock musicians who had experiences with UFOs and aliens and end up writing songs about it. Come Sail Away comes to mind. But he started calling it like the wow factor. Like a UFO shows up and you go, wow, and it kind of changes your life. It opens your world up. You are ontologically changed after you encounter the paranormal. Anyone who has encountered the paranormal knows that it is not a casual experience until you've done it enough times. But instead, it's a rocker. It rocks your world. If you've ever seen a UFO, it is not something you look at and go like, that's nice. It is, you could have any kind of reaction to it, but it will be extreme. There is no casual approaches. So I always think it's funny. It's like I saw one and they were like, why didn't you take a picture? And I was like, I was so stunned. I couldn't move. I could not take a picture. It could not be done. The idea of taking a picture was beyond. It also felt perverse and obscene that I was seeing this. Like it did not, and I'm totally open. Long before I was totally open to UFOs and stuff like that. But to see one, I was very much like, I felt like I was seeing something I shouldn't see, as in, like, you are not permitted to see. Not like you shouldn't see this because it breaks the laws of physics, but you shouldn't see it as in there is some kind of prohibition or a trespass going on just observing this thing that froze me to my bones. Campbell looks at the paranormal as not necessarily glitches in the simulation. He's like, the simulation doesn't really glitch. The simulation only glitches when you're doing particle physics and you're asking it to do something that it can't do, like be a wave and a particle at the same time. Like there it would glitch. It's got to be one or the other. Those are the glitches. So all the quote unquote glitches happen on the quantum scale. In real life, there are no glitches. The simulation does not forget to do something because the scope of your experience is as far as the simulation goes. It is only your subjective experience and everyone else's subjective experience that is ever rendered at any time. That is what you were getting at with the local simulation hypothesis. Mm-hmm. They don't take really far. I mean, there's a sub footnote to that one that needs to be added because he's like, maybe only the Earth is being rendered. And it's like, no. It's hyper local. It's only what's coming in through your eyes and ears that's real at any time. Whatever you have left in the garage or outside is no one needs to see it. So it doesn't need to be rendered. So it doesn't need to be there. We don't have to pretend that light is cascading off it or anything like that. Mm-hmm. In the history thread, it's in the history. So when you go back and you'll see it and it'll be there and you'll be like, oh, well, there it is. Campbell does mention like people having funny experiences where they go to get like a beer out of the fridge and suddenly there's like 3 or 4 beers missing. But he's like, I don't know if that's a glitch or if it's just a tease, like the paranormal. So this is a long way to get to this point. The paranormal is an element that is dropped into subjective experience and cult, and which then peters out into the wider cultural milieu because everyone talks about their paranormal experiences. They go on to found religions. They go on to inspire sciences or other kind of kooky things to do. Uh, it's an element that is dropped into the subjective experience to keep it from stagnating, to stop it. It is a novelty. It injects novelty. And when you think about it, that is exactly what paranormal experiences do. They are not mundane. They are not casual. They are called paranormal. They're called supranormal. They're called transcendent. They're called religious. These things show up and they influence human thought, human behavior, and more importantly, they change the quality of the being. They change the quality of the consciousness that is exposed to them. People who have seen something that they cannot explain never forget it. They always return to it. They're always like, they go back to their kind of like normal lives, which is what is a normal life, but just like a pattern of habits. They go back to their pattern of habits, and every once in a while they go like, there was this one thing that happened to me that I cannot explain. And it becomes a story, and it becomes like information that spreads. That is why, for instance, you can't really study the paranormal scientifically exclusively. There really needs to be a new field. And I thought like David Medkeff and Pasulka were really touching on this in their recent UAP UFO course. Is that if you really want to study the paranormal, you need science, but you have to realize science is a limited tool in this domain. It is a limited tool in this domain. And then on the other side, you need the humanities. And these two have to really move together because, the paranormal happens to somebody. And then what? It has this immediate local influence. People start telling stories. People can't go to sleep at night afterwards. It becomes part of the culture. And then it becomes what? Like a campfire story, the Jersey Devil, it becomes kind of like famous. And there is no corner of this earth that is free from people who have had strange experiences that they cannot explain. There is the urge to deny it and to bury it and to say it's, one of the attitudes is if it's not scientific, it's not worth discussing. Of course, that's incredibly limited, but the human, there's no place on earth that has just created a group of rationalists, realists who believe in nothing but determinism, and have never been influenced by a strange dream or a weird vision or a synchronicity that is beyond chance. So in Campbell's model, again, to give you a long answer, in Campbell's model, the paranormal, the simulation's realness doesn't need to be maintained 100% of the time, 24/7. The simulation is also not free of influence from, in Campbell's model, the conscious computer, so not the programmer, but the conscious computer that has invented this simulation to help evolve itself. It has discovered that adding strange elements, paranormal elements, keep people from evolutionarily stagnating. They do interesting things, and we share information in a way. We become intimate. People become very intimate when they share a paranormal episode that happened to them. And by paranormal, I also mean religious. So it has a function. It's not necessarily a glitch. I know that's the popular nomenclature now, but if a portal opens up in front of you, it's not a glitch. Like, you're supposed to see that. Any paranormal thing you see is not something you stumbled upon. It's something that has been added to your now your personal database of experience that you can riff off of and think about. And it stops your beliefs from being stagnating, because you would think the opposite. You would think that, like, well, if it turns everyone religious, doesn't it just turn everyone into morons? No. The idea is that whatever belief system you had prior, whether it is, like, let's say Christian, or whether or not it's scientific or something like that, you drop a paranormal episode into it, or a paranormal element into it, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the scientist is going to absorb it scientifically. It's going to open up, it has the potential to open up different ways of thinking about the world, and that, like, well, maybe science isn't the end all be all. And then by association, maybe the way I'm living my life is not the end all be all. That's what it's really about. And then under the Christian, they see the UFO and they're like, wow, that was like an angel. Perhaps I should be more tolerant, because now I realize people have been seeing these things for a very long time and interpreting them different ways with different languages. Wow. So that's, again, a long answer to a strange question.
I don't mind long answers. It just raises more questions in my mind, but one of them being, then in this scenario that you're talking about, Campbell's theory, well, maybe I should formulate it a little bit different. The way that people nowadays talk about paranormal or supernatural experiences, they have either like a new age, quote unquote new age type of explanation, or they have a quote unquote religious explanation, or they have maybe a quote unquote scientific leaning explanation, like, oh, these are dimensions, these are, so you could have, like, okay, one version is a dimension. Another version is like, oh, it's the veil between the two worlds, or it's, all of these different explanations for why this is happening. But is that then, are those types of explanations excluded from this? Because it's supposed to be there for, it's supposed to be there to liven up your life, to make it interesting. So it's not, so we're not talking about different dimensions anymore then, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. All of that is swept away, because even the physicalist answer of dimension, like, that sounds like a word, like it's a dimension. Sure. It's like, no, that's a physical explanation for something. So a portal opens up, right? And something comes out of it. It's like, wow, there must be other dimensions, right? You're absolutely right. That is swept away. And even Campbell is quite open about the fact that, like, he's a master out of body person. He does out of body at will. But he said early on is that, like, you can go out of body and visit other virtual realities that other beings apparently inhabit. However, is this just something that was presented to me? It could be that too. So there might be other worlds out there, but Campbell's very hard and fast to say that, like, worlds do not interact with other worlds. And none of this exists in space-time. Even this thing that looks like space-time, that looks like dimensionality, it's not. It's just information. It is only information. So you're exactly right. The whole idea that there is another world that has bled into our world, he's like, no, that doesn't happen. That's not allowed. Like, also, how would that benefit the overall evolution of the system? You would just have two confused things looking at each other, freaking each other out, So the chat rooms are excluded from each other,
Okay. So then this would all just be a natural experience then for us.
That's right. That's right. Is that this is totally natural. And in fact, before the 17th century, despite that you might be burned at the stake as a witch, there was nothing strange about I mean, there was nothing. There wasn't this extra level of prohibition to seeing what is totally natural, which is like, I saw an angel, I saw a UFO. That's correct. Is that, it's only until they became the work of the devil or religious nonsense from the eyes of the scientists, or mass hysteria. Everyone's favorite is mass
Mm,
hysteria, right?
yeah.
So those are ways that have been attempted to contextualize something that is completely normal. And that is one of the things that makes me really excited actually about Campbell's propositions, is that it demystifies. Like right now, unless you have grown up in a place that regularly practices some sort of folk magic or shamanism, magic in the paranormal is elevated to something very special that can only happen to very special people. And I think this is not true. And also, Campbell puts out the same thing. He's like, these are all natural to consciousness. They need to be learned, but they can be done. Every magic book out there is secretly trying to get other people to do the strange things that you realize that you can do, or that you realize are available to human consciousness if only the interest is there. This also goes like right into, the whole thing of remote viewing UFOs or UFO summoning. People go out into a field and they're like, we're all going to see a UFO. And then sometimes it shows up and everyone's like, how the hell did that happen? It's like, well, think about it. Do you really think you sent out a telepathic message and it was picked up by some, you know, people who otherwise were doing something else on their journey but decided to drop by and wave at you? I mean, just think it through, right?
Mm-hmm.
So no, it's absolutely natural. We have created, there has been taboos around it, there has been prohibitions around it, hence alchemy, hence all our systems of codes and correspondences in the Western tradition. It's like, yeah, I always love it because it's like, we're not practicing magic, and it's like, yeah, that's a three-headed snake biting a sun. That's also a lion, but there's nothing weird there. It's kind of funny. I always wish I could go back in time and see them going like, they'll never figure this out. I'm like, that looks pretty hardcore what you're drawing with those triangles and everything. So it's completely natural to us. It seems to me now, the older I get, is that the special thing is actually having the curiosity and the interest, and then sort of resisting the attempt for the mind to congeal that into a uniform ontology. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying like creating a new belief system.
Mm.
Right? Like, you see a UFO and you create a new belief system out of that, like the Raelians or
Right,
something.
right.
Yeah.
So this is really
And
making me think though of Jeff Kripal's work with Whitley Strieber, their book called The Supernatural, and the argument there was that in our society, in our culture now, we want to place these types of anomalous experiences in this separate outside category as if it is set apart from just normal everyday occurrences. But the argument there is no, it's supernatural. It's a part of the natural world. But for our religion, our culture, society, science as well, all these different narratives that come into play, that is saying, well, no, this can't be a part of the natural world. This can't be a part of natural phenomenon because it's set apart. It's this other thing. And from what I guess this is giving me a different perspective on how we can look at this. If you're just going from the get-go saying, well, this is all just all part of life. This is a part of life in the way we understand what life is here. This is all a part of it.
right.
And some people think, well, that's a bunch of BS, and I don't believe in that.
Sure.
And then other people say,
Sure.
well, I wholeheartedly think that this happens because it happened to me.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a it That's exactly right. And there's two ways of going about just what you said right there that I think are kind of fun, which is all you do when you say that like this doesn't happen to people, either you dismiss it and say like this doesn't happen, that's not real, or you say this doesn't happen to people, this is miraculous. You end up creating like personality cults out of it one way or another. Because think about it.
Yeah.
Because you're like, this doesn't happen, that's bullshit, don't go there. And then on the other end, it's like, no, they saw God. Only very special people see God. It's like, really? You have to be special? Like, if you read that book, it happens to drunks, it happens to anybody. So
Yeah.
there's that angle. So there's a Sean Carroll out there runs a podcast. He's a very respected physicist. He ascribes to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Everett. That's a long story, but I won't go into that. He did an interview. I forget the name of the guy who was the host, but he did it alongside Daniel Dennett. And he said that I am not going to spend time looking into something that maybe some guy saw once somewhere if it doesn't comport to the law of physics, to the laws of physics. Now, because the laws of physics have showed me that they work, and this is just some, edge case that ultimately doesn't matter to me because I am not going to drop the laws of physics, period. So that was his statement. I think Sean Carroll's a rather intelligent guy, but it was funny because, he laid it out so beautifully that if you have an experience or if you know somebody who's had an experience that doesn't comport with the laws of mechanics, then they have kind of a handicap. They can't look at it. It's amazing. It can't be looked at. Either it can't be looked at, it won't be looked at, and it definitely won't be assimilated. This is, really amazing to me that scientists say this. And I really kind of think it sort of draws the line between experimental scientists and theoretical scientists, because you could find plenty of engineers who are, an engineer is applied physics, right? You can find plenty of engineers who are interested in the paranormal because they're like, well, we engineered it in a lab. So, we actually did it. So I don't know what the hell, I know you can't accept it, but I'm telling you, we did it. My favorite examples of this are, Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, because, Russell Targ was one of the pioneers behind the laser beam. I think Hal Puthoff did the same or something else in optics, but he also wrote a textbook on like quantum electro-optics or something like that, I believe. I can't remember the exact title of the thing. These are two engineers that were able to perfect remote viewing techniques under a scientific criterion and did it for the US government for 10 years and got several $1,000,000 to continue it. They didn't get rich doing it. They also were able to prove that you can play the stock market to do it. These are two engineers. They published some papers about it. They proved that it is beyond a Faraday cage, so it's not some kind of mechanic emanating from the mind. They showed that it is not space-time dependent, which was obvious from the get-go, but not chrono-dependent, meaning you could see things in the future or the past. It isn't just stuck into into our immediate space-time frame that I guess we're not really sharing that thanks to Einstein, right? But these are engineers who were able to show it, shadow of a doubt, that hey, this stuff is absolutely real. We're scientists. We are not New Agers. We don't have a model for it, but we have all this data and we can share with you the protocols. Now and now those guys are, getting up there in years, but now you've got like Travis Taylor, guy with two PhDs, a couple of master's degrees, also works for the US government, right? Is on that History Channel show that everyone loves, The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. And he's out there doing real experiments where laser beams are being bent and things are disappearing and whatnot. And it's not just sensational TV, which is the lazy, easy answer that someone like Carol would throw out there, which is like, well, it doesn't comport to the laws of physics. This is just television, whatever. These things are, even though it's like a multi-million dollar, probably high-tech scientific enterprise, it's not an amusement park. And with all that going on, it's like, no, I don't want to. I mean, it's important, I guess, to use that word, is that there is a prohibition. There is certain people will say or will have an attitude that it's like, if it doesn't comport to my understanding or our current understanding of this very successful, no denying it, very successful body of knowledge called physics, no one's denying its success. But if it doesn't fix into that, I'm not even going to look at it. I'm not going to look at any other research data that says there is more. Now, to me, that's a non-scientific approach. I am not a scientist. I like what Alan Watts says. I'm basically an entertainer. But this whole approach where, hey, here's some repeated data from that you can actually do yourself too, that proves that these things are real. And not only that, but they have effects on super sensitive equipment. One of my favorite ones is they asked Ingo Swann, one of their first remote viewers, who is an artist here in New York. They asked him to take a look at the basement of the SRI building and see what he can see. And there's some sort of piece of super sensitive equipment down there. I forgot what kind it was, but it had these like detectors on it and this meter, and the meter spiked when he remote viewed it at the same time, because all the graduate students who were watching it were like, what the hell's going on with our super sensitive like detector that's not supposed to detect anything really? Like, oh my God, it just spiked really hard at exactly the same time that Ingo Swann is like upstairs doing a remote viewing experiment. So that's a real effect. So in terms of the paranormal elements in the simulation situation, is that Campbell ends up putting out that like, this is how paranormal stuff works. How do you explain the unexplained? How is it that a UFO would travel 1 billion light years, okay, and visit us just to pop into our atmosphere and pop out again? Like, where does that logic actually work? How does remote viewing work? What are ghosts? He told this is amazing. Many years ago, I asked Campbell, like, I want to explore this a little bit further. Do you have any recommendations? And he said, like, yeah, try like not speaking for a few days, like a weekend, maybe a week, see what happens. Just live your life on a silent retreat. I never did that, but I always wanted to. But he told me, which blew my mind, he was like, play with a Ouija board. And I was stunned. I was stunned that he was like, no, just play with a Ouija board. Just, write down the numbers and the letters and then play with a Ouija board. See what happens. Since he's told me that, I have used the Ouija board 300 or 400 times with friends and things. I know, the cursed Ouija board, right?
Yeah.
His explanation is like, why is the impossible possible? The impossible is possible because it's a simulation. Now, what do you really mean when you say it's a simulation? It means exactly that sentence that you mentioned earlier. It appears real. And you don't even need to go into physicists who talk about how atoms are better described as information to do this. You can go into cognitive science if you want. Donald Hoffman, I guess, is like the leader in that field now, where we already know colors are an illusion. There are no colors. There is no such thing. We see them right now. We see them everywhere, but there are no colors in terms of what is total reality. There are colors in terms of the subjective experience. As a human being, that's not colorblind, period. That's it.
Mhm.
The paranormal is an element that is dropped into subjective experience and which then peters out into the wider cultural milieu because everyone talks about their paranormal experiences. They go on to found religions. They go on to inspire sciences or other kind of kooky things to do. Uh, it's an element that is dropped into the subjective experience to keep it from stagnating, to stop it. It is a novelty. It injects novelty. And when you think about it, that is exactly what paranormal experiences do. They are not mundane. They are not casual. They are called paranormal. They're called supranormal. They're called transcendent. They're called religious. These things show up and they influence human thought, human behavior, and more importantly, they change the quality of the being. They change the quality of the consciousness that is exposed to them. People who have seen something that they cannot explain never forget it. They always return to it. They're always like, they go back to their kind of like normal lives, which is what is a normal life, but just like a pattern of habits. They go back to their pattern of habits. And every once in a while, they go like, there was this one thing that happened to me that I cannot explain. And it becomes a story and it becomes like information that spreads. That is why, for instance, you can't really study the paranormal scientifically exclusively. There really needs to be a new field. And I thought like David Medkeff and Pasulka were really touching on this in their recent UAP UFO course.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that if you really want to study the paranormal, you need science, but you have to realize science is a limited tool in this domain. It is a limited tool in this domain. And then on the other side, you need the humanities. And these two have to really move together because, the paranormal happens to somebody. And then what? It has this immediate local influence. People start telling stories. People can't go to sleep at night afterwards. It becomes part of the culture. And then it becomes what? Like a campfire story, the Jersey Devil, it becomes kind of like famous. And there is no corner of this earth that is free from people who have had strange experiences that they cannot explain. There is the urge to deny it and to bury it and to say it's, one of the attitudes is if it's not scientific, it's not worth discussing. Of course, that's incredibly limited, but the human, there's no place on earth that has just created a group of rationalists, realists who believe in nothing but determinism, and have never been influenced by a strange dream or a weird vision or a synchronicity that is beyond chance. So in Campbell's model, again, to give you a long answer, in Campbell's model, the paranormal, the simulation's realness doesn't need to be maintained 100% of the time, 24/7. The simulation is also not free of influence from, in Campbell's model, the conscious computer, so not the programmer, but the conscious computer that has invented this simulation to help evolve itself. It has discovered that adding strange elements, paranormal elements, keep people from evolutionarily stagnating. They do interesting things and we share information in a way. We become intimate. People become very intimate when they share a paranormal episode that happened to them. And by paranormal, I also mean religious. So it has a function. It's not necessarily a glitch. I know that's the popular nomenclature now, but if a portal opens up in front of you, it's not a glitch. Like, you're supposed to see that. Any paranormal thing you see is not something you stumbled upon. It's something that has been added to your, now your personal database of experience that you can riff off of and think about. And it stops your beliefs from being stagnating, because you would think the opposite. You would think that, like, well, if it turns everyone religious, doesn't it just turn everyone into morons? No, the idea is that whatever belief system you had prior, whether it is, like, let's say Christian, or whether or not it's scientific or something like that, you drop a paranormal episode into it, or a paranormal element into it, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the scientist is going to absorb it scientifically. It's going to open up, it has the potential to open up different ways of thinking about the world, and that, like, well, maybe science isn't the end all be all. And then by association, maybe the way I'm living my life is not the end all be all. That's what it's really about. So that's his definition of consciousness. Consciousness is a system that is basically built of information that can experience, recall, make sense, change itself, and have choices. And that is the fundamental unit in his model. All right. In the beginning was consciousness, and that's what it could do. It was an information system that could do those things. Before that, there was no information. That is the beginning. This information system has to evolve. It has to evolve, because that's the second assumption. The assumption is evolution is real. And evolution is just a way of really saying, evolve or die. It's like survive, continue. Certain processes will continue and they will be beneficial, or those processes will be selected out because they're not beneficial. I am not getting what I need as a paramecium or as a plant, and so I will change, or I will die. I will reach a branch of evolution that leads to nothing. Like very large lizards. Very large lizards have failed the game. Yes, they were wiped out by the meteor, but if you haven't noticed, they haven't really come back. So, and the ones that work undergo an explosion, like the Cambrian explosion, when suddenly there's a bunch of trilobites everywhere. Why is there a bunch of trilobites everywhere? Because that worked. That was useful. For what was needed at the time, that was useful. Okay, so coming back to our original thing, in the beginning was an awareness with a choice that had to evolve or die. Now, why it had to evolve or die is because another thing that seems to be constant in the universe, and Campbell has basically said in so many words that he should addend his two assumptions and add a third one, which is entropy is real. Entropy is fundamental. What entropy is, in the very, very stripped down way of saying it, is entropy is that systems tend to fall apart over time. Systems tend to be subject to noise. A measure of entropy in a system is a measure of its disorder. This brings us to an important point, especially for fellow occultists out there who've been like, this has been a strange episode. What about this is useful or related to esoterica and the occult? So this is the important point. The virtual reality world, okay, is not fundamental. It is not. It is consequential. There are consequences here. There is feedback here. But the consciousness is not here. The consciousness is the big computer. It's a subpart of the big conscious computer that is playing in the VR. So this is where you get to your Platonic kind of situation right here. The reason why you can go out of body is because you don't really have a body. You have a consciousness that can move around and do things. Consciousness can do all kinds of stuff. It is natural to consciousness, as we've been saying. So that's where you get your interesting divide between the your Malkuth and your Kether. Now, again, why is the system doing this? Why is the system doing this? It's because it has to evolve or die. And the way to evolve is to what? Get along. So essentially what's going on is this big consciousness system is trying to get along with itself. Parts of it have realized that the way to combat disorder, entropy, right? The way to survive, right, is for its components to get along with its other components. They get along and they have to learn to get along. The suggestion that we here are the pinnacle of evolution in this large system. And as you can imagine, it's like there are multiple virtual realities with multiple agents involved in them, but they're all involved in the same mission, which is the big system trying to be more streamlined. So here we are in this situation. Now, it can't just say, get along, because look, you are an agent with free will and choice. Like we just said, you're just a smaller version of the same thing. We can see a lot of esoterica right there. I mean, I'm sure the Hermeticists are jumping up and down right now because they're right. They're right. It's, God's
Microcosm,
little brother.
macrocosm. Yeah.
Microcosm, macrocosm, God's little brother is what man is. And they co-create the world together. And what do you know? The agenda is a right-hand path agenda. Why is the agenda a right-hand path agenda? Because you got to get along. And it's like, well, shouldn't we murder our enemies? Shouldn't we smite them and humiliate them and all that kind of stuff? And it's like, no, because guess what? That happens and it creates a chain reaction that continues that in perpetuity. How long has Village A had a blood feud against Village B? Like, doesn't work. You can keep trying it, but I'll bet you it's not going to work. So, or let's say you wipe them out completely. Well, then you get a rumor spreading like those people are bloodthirsty assholes and you shouldn't do business with them. What do you know? So that's his model. His model is that like there is no programmer in the classical sense of what people assume the programmer to be when you talk about a simulated world. It's a conscious computer that has split itself up into pieces and has found out that creating a world like this is quite useful when it comes to its long-term goal of sustaining its evolution. This is so in line with virtually every right-hand path esoteric philosophy you can find. So there is there is an assumed problem in everyone who talks about the world being an illusion or the world being a dream or the world being a simulation, which is even if you proved it otherwise, that could just be part of the dream, right? That could just be part of the simulation. So how do you end up proving it? Descartes wrestled with a similar problem with the cogito. He was like, I don't know if I can prove anything about the realness of the external world. It could be the work of a demon. It could be my senses could be lying to me. But at least I can say that I think, therefore I am, which is like, well, at least I know I'm real. Like I appear to be real. And that is as far as I'm able to go. The irony of that, of course, is that Daniel Dennett ended up flipping it and saying only the external world is real and the conscious agent is an illusion, which is sort of a bizarre thing that's happened in philosophy at some point. But that's the idea is, Karl Popper threw out there that falsifiability is an important criteria for any scientific proposition. It's like, can you come up with something that would disprove your theory? And there's been a little bit of give and take on Karl Popper's assertion that falsifiability is a sterling criterion. Some chemists have argued, like, well, if I'm trying to build a new molecule here, what exactly is it that I'm falsifying, you know? So, however, it is an important idea that has continued to linger. And I think it's one that's worth, not dismissing outright, but not using as a use-all tool that we should apply to every idea that's put on the table. It does have some value, but it shouldn't be used, in all cases at all times. But this is a problem. And I started calling it just the Morpheus problem because it was, Morpheus famously says, have you ever had a dream that you weren't sure, that you were so sure is real? How would you tell the difference between the dream world and the real world? And we've been wrestling with this question for some time. Some of them are putting out that space is actually made of little discrete chunks and it only looks continuous. Time is made out of little discrete chunks and it only looks continuous. Everyone who's putting forward some kind of idea that the universe is the result of a computation holds on to this idea that it's like, if we get down to that level, it's not continuous. They will always be discrete. There will always be bits. Okay. Campbell came up with a really, really brilliant idea. He was like, if you can prove without a doubt that space is continuous, you have falsified every known version of simulation theory. Now, the way you would do that is you would have to have a very, very powerful, let's just for the sake of simplicity, we'll say microscope, okay? And you would have to have a beam of light that you could really, really slow down. We've done experiments now where we have like slowed down light by putting it into sort of like opaque material that makes the beam kind of slower than it would normally go. And it's then photographed at a very high rate. So you can see the light actually kind of, propagate. You can see it propagate. So his argument is now, if you came up with an experiment and you looked on a very, very small scale at very, very, very high time rates, if you saw that the propagation of light was a continuous flow, or if you saw that it sort of propagates actually as discrete chunks rather than a continuous wave, that would be your evidence against simulation theory. If it truly propagates as a continuous wave, it would suggest that space-time is also continuous. There's sort of problems with continuous space and continuous time because the entire definition of the word continuous means you can divide it up infinitely. And I think that's sort of when you really think about it, sort of a hard pill to swallow if you have any kind of like slight physics education and you really think about it, even though we model everything with continuous space-time, because that's we deal on the Newtonian scale most of the time. So, we don't actually bring in quantum mechanics often when it comes to, like airplanes and cars and things like that. But right now it's all sort of modeled as being continuous. But when you really think about it, when you really sit down and think about it, the idea that space is infinitely divisible, I think there's almost an intuitive hunch that we have when we really think about that, where you're like, so like the number line, like you can infinitely divide space. Infinitely? You can go further and further and further and further and further. If that's provable, if you can prove that, and you could possibly do that with a beam of light that is slowed down and looked at a very tight scale, you could presumably prove that you are not in a grid, not in a lattice, and that would show, continuousness. And why that disproves simulation theory is, like I said, all forms of simulation theory assume that the world is digital bits. So there, it has value. It has value because it's like it has the potential to reinterpret a field and reinterpret phenomena in such a way that it actually leads to going forward. And I think that has, in terms of like now outside of the context of science, that has value for everybody. It doesn't really matter what your belief system is. What matters is what it makes available to you and what it makes unavailable to you. Ultimately, your paradigm, your reality tunnel, as Leary and Wilson called it, it doesn't matter. The value of it, yeah, again, it comes in like, well, how does it inform your interaction styles? How does it inform your intent? How does it inform how you behave with others? Because whether or not you believe the universe is a simulation, we are trapped in a social system. Earth is a social system. It's also a rather closed social, outside of the sun and Jupiter helping us from not getting creamed by asteroids. We're in a pretty closed system here. So, we're trapped with interacting with each other. It doesn't matter if you believe that there are one gods or many gods or no gods, if it ends up encouraging you to behave pro-socially, right? If you behave pro-socially, if you, get along with others, if you're thoughtful, if you're kind, it doesn't really matter what you believe. Value, I think, is really that what's valuable to you is really just like, does it enrich you? And then do you, by extension, end up enriching your community? And that's not necessarily through proselytizing and evangelizing on how, like, well, you have like the best system of bogus crap to share. But that don't do that. But it's more like, hey, are you a valuable member of your community? Are you reliable? Are you trustworthy? Like that kind of thing.
Right.
That's basically it. And then the other one is that, like, what's valuable also is, like, does it point out any sort of subtleties, nuances, or naivetes that are normally not even noticed